West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est long, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Last week, House Republicans voted out their number 3 leader, Liz Cheney, for telling the truth about former President Trump and the January 6th Capitol attacks. Well, this week, House Republicans will take another vote on a bipartisan deal to form a commission to examine those attacks, even as several House Republicans are trying to rewrite history about that terrible day. My next guest was at the Capitol during the attacks of January 6th and voted to impeach President Trump over it. Joining me now is Republican Congressman Fred Upton of Michigan. Thank you so much for joining me, Congressman. So your colleagues working to form a January 6th commission said they struck a bipartisan deal. GOP leader Kevin McCarthy says he's still looking into it. Do you support the proposal, and would you like to see McCarthy support it?
Absolutely, I support it. John Katko has done a remarkable job as the top Republican on the Homeland Security Committee. He's a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, of which I'm a vice chair, and he has been working very hard the last number of weeks, like 5 to 6 weeks, on trying to craft a deal that really does make sense, that will bring Republican support to it. You'll remember that initially, Speaker Pelosi said that it was going to be a partisan commission. It was going to be 7 Democrats, 4 Republicans. Virtually all of us balked at that, said that's not really fair. So they've moved. The Democrats have moved. I've talked to Steny Hoyer and others. This is an equal commission. They have subpoena power. Both sides have to agree to it. You have to have a majority vote. Has to be done before the end of the year. Yep. It's not going to be current sitting members of Congress, so I think it's going to be fair. It should get a good number of votes, and yes, I do hope Kevin McCarthy supports it.
So Leader McCarthy spoke to then President Trump on January 6th as the rioters were inside the Capitol. Liz Cheney said he should testify before the commission. Do you agree?
Yeah, well, my sense is that body, the 10 people that are there, are going to subpoena a number of folks. I would suspect, and I'm not a lawyer, I would suspect that Kevin will be subpoenaed. He'll be asked to give his rendition of what happened, as will a number of members of Congress that were there, whether they were barricading the doors inside the chamber. I wasn't actually in the chamber when it happened, but I was obviously on Capitol Hill. I have some broken glass, in fact, that I picked up when we returned from votes that night. But yeah, they're going to subpoena a number of people. It's important to get to the truth and find out just how widespread this thing was and what can we do to make sure that it never can happen again.
Speaking of the truth, some of your Republican colleagues are trying to rewrite history about the January 6th insurrection. Listen to what some of them said this week.
The DOJ is harassing peaceful patriots across the country.
It was Trump supporters who lost their lives that day, not Trump supporters who were taking the lives of others.
It was not an insurrection. You know, if you didn't know the TV footage was a video from January the 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit.
Congressman Upton, what's your response to those statements from your Republican colleague?
It's absolutely bogus. It's absolutely bogus. You know, I was there. I watched a number of the folks walk down to the White House and then back. I've got a balcony on my office. So I saw them go down. I heard the noise. The flashbangs, smelled some of the gas as it moved my way. Obviously, was watching the live video. It was carried on all the networks at the time. Talked to a number of the SWAT team members after it was over. Obviously talked to some of my colleagues who were in the chamber. And I spent some time with Officer Fanone, the Metropolitan Police officer, whose body cam was, you all aired it earlier this week, but it's been widely now available. I saw firsthand what that was, and it did not change my opinion from what I personally saw back on January 6th.
Does it make you angry when you hear your Republican
it's important that we do this.
That?
Well, I just, someone said earlier this week that, one of my colleagues who said some of those things was actually in the chamber, hearing the noise, heard the shots.
So what are they doing?
I don't know how you can be a better witness if...
So what are they doing here? Why are they doing
Well, that's why it's important. I don't know. I don't know what their motivation is, but I know that as I talked to some colleagues, even again this week, who were in the chamber, it was terribly frightening. It was they knew that by stopping some of those folks from getting inside to the House chamber, it's probably saved their lives. You know, I saw the gallows that were constructed on the east front of the Capitol. I've talked, one of the police officers, Capitol Hill police officers, is from my hometown. Spent some time with him. It was chilling what happened. Absolutely chilling. And that's why I think that it's important that we move forward with this bipartisan commission, get the facts out, try to assure the American public this is what happened, and let the facts lead us to the conclusion.
Let's talk more broadly about the state of your party. Your friend and colleague, Liz Cheney, of course, was replaced with Elise Stefanik as conference chair this week. I want you to listen to what Congresswoman Cheney had to say right after she was voted out.
We must go forward based on truth. We cannot both embrace the big lie and embrace the Constitution. I will do everything I can to ensure that the former president never again gets anywhere near the Oval Office.
Congressman Upton, you've been a member of Congress since 1987. You've seen a lot of ups and downs. You're one of only 10 Republicans who voted to impeach President Trump. How worried are you about the future of your party and, more broadly, democracy?
Well, a couple of things. We only win by addition, not subtraction. I was a supporter of Liz. I've gotten to know her quite well over the last number of months, for sure. You're not going to win elections unless you have that big tent. So I was very disappointed about what we did. She accepted that it should go by a voice vote earlier this week, and so that's the way that it happened. It's the president, former president, that continues, and even yesterday, about the big lie about the election being stolen. We're not going to win unless we're a big tent, and we're not going to win unless we add to our base, not subtract from it. Certainly in 24.
Does it concern you that your own party leadership now, to a person, subscribes to a former president who, in your words, is still pushing the big lie?
Well, it sort of is what it is, just the way that it is. We all run our own races. We all have our district operations. We all, for me, I've never been afraid to be for or against a particular president, regardless of party, in trying to get things done. That's always been my mission. And I know that as you look to the future, we have to have somewhat of that independent voice, particularly from purple states or purple districts. You can't be a rubber stamp. What works in Southwest Michigan is entirely different than what happens in, Plano, Texas.
It is Monday, the 17th of May of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays because of the weekend. It's always because of the weekend. Speaking of which, I thought Jared Kushner had achieved Middle East peace in our time. He stood at a dais. He had the signed document I think they called it an instrument. The signed instrument in hand, and told everybody it's okay. You can go home and go to bed now. Neville. History doesn't repeat, but it resonates. So, it looks like Jared's Middle East peace in our time has blown up just like everybody said it would. Not that we wanted it to. Now, I know that the easiest way to explain this is that both sides are going at each other, and if only one side would stop. What I want to know is how come these conflagrations always occur when Bibi's power is threatened. Look it up. Every time. And, of course, human lives hang in the balance, women and children mostly, and now they're dead. Because apparently that wins elections. Among, well, a certain subset of the political class. Okay, well, I don't know what to do about it. I know that there's a certain Christo-fascist segment of America that would like to see it go up in a nuclear holocaust because, no pun intended there, because they want the end times. They're such cultists that they would want the whole Middle East to go up in a mushroom cloud because they think it harkens the return of Jesus Christ. All right. I think that that's a fool's errand, and the reason we have a separation of church and state in this country is so that we don't have anything like that happen, and that we, as a nation state, would actively work against such a terrible tragedy. Okay, I know Jimmy Carter got a Nobel. And Jared wanted his too. It's okay, everybody, go to bed. We got peace in our time, right here in the Middle East. Yeah, well, what Jared was there for was to get some property contracts signed, and he made a little bit of money on the side, too. That's how they did it. But now, apparently, I guess Joe has a Venmo account, and that is just a step too far. After 4 years of the absolute Hatch Act violations is just part of it. But we're talking graft, grift, and whatever else comes around with that. It's all criminal. But Joe having a Venmo account, that's just too far. We can't countenance that. All right. Yep. So they're going to find every little thing that they can to complain about Joe. Because they don't have anything. They go after his dogs. When they get the cat, they're going to go after the cat. Well, I did see some color in the Rose Garden at the White House. You know, the one that Melania, the Russian, sparrow? Red sparrow? I really think she's a handler. But absolutely destroyed with this monochromal, looks like a black and white photo, even though it's in color. What's up with that? I don't know. Maybe she's depressed from all the Soviet realism. So she had to take it out on America. And they did. That was their plan. Okay, I just wish that the truth would come out. Well, we already know the truth has already been out, but I just wish it would be, on 60 Minutes, for instance, how long Donald Trump has been in bed with the Russians, even when they were commies. Well, socialists. The former Soviet Union. Just remember, Ivana's dad was a KGB officer. Coincidence? None whatsoever. Who else was a KGB officer? That's right, Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. And now we are where we are. And fully 73 million people bought into the Russian line. Just don't call them traitors. I just love it. They believe the big lie that Trump won the election, but they can't believe that any Russians have been arrested for trying to influence and hack our infrastructure, even. They're in jail. There's also ones under indictment for trying to influence our elections. It's not made up. You're going to cite all of the lawsuits that were filed to prove what we call the big lie, except they lost 63 of 64. And what was the one that they won? A judge ruled that instead of standing 10 feet away, they could stand 6 feet away from where some ballots were being counted in one section of a Michigan recount. That was the only case they won. Rather than standing at 10 feet, they could stand at 6. So I call that almost undefeated. In fact, I think Mark Elias is undefeated, and now we have the rest of the country to deal with this audit. You know, they're going to be doing an election audit for Trump 20 years after he's dead, because they just cannot believe what is happening. All right. Well, apparently here in town, I have seen more mask wearing than I saw during the whole of the pandemic, right when the CDC says you can take off your masks. I don't know what it is about anti-authoritarian types, especially of the right-wing sort. All this past year, masker, you're a loser. You're wearing a mask. Those are like gag balls. Now they're all wearing masks. Jeez. So what do we have to do? Tell them to stop, or tell them to be commies and then they won't? I don't understand it. Oh, I know. They can't believe that they're commies. They're not commies. But they are part, or at least sympathizers of a mob government and a organized mob style of government. They look to Vlad as a example of what could be here. Now, we better remember that there's a sizable amount of the Russian population that likes Vlad, even though his actual totals in these elections, he always says he won by 98%. Well, that's pretty easy to win when you're counting the votes yourself. But who believes that? But there is a sizable contingency that is very loyal to Vlad, almost cult-like. And we are in the same boat. I can't believe that they would look at this guy. I mean, at least, let's be clear, at least Vlad had some competence. This guy is just, I don't know. If everything is transactional, it's really hard to run an efficient organized mob-style government. And I think that's why a lot of the mobsters really didn't like the guy. But he's still here. They didn't like him. You know, they have a way of, shall we say, eliminating the problem. So maybe this guy's a lot more adept than we give him credit for. He seems like pretty much of an entitled rich boy dimwit. Well, I mean, that's true. So I guess we have to then explain it by some feral condition that he has for survival. And that might be even more true. He knows not what he's doing, but he's doing it rather well. Yeah. Well, I don't think that he's going to sit back and sit down with the future David Frost and deconstruct how he rules. I don't know if he can. I know he can't. But so we still have Joe Biden. And boy, is he getting things done. And you might look at the CDC's ruling on whether to wear masks or not as indicative of that. I will probably cite more the vaccine. Because right now I think the CDC is a work in progress. They're being pulled in all sorts of different ways, like Wall Street. We got to get these people back to work and work at slave wages again. How is this economy going to be run? Didn't we have a civil war to prevent that? Well, I guess we all agree that if people sign a contract to work for slave wages, they just have to honor that contract now, don't they? Yeah, we're back to that again. I don't blame people for not wanting to come back and work for slave wages. I don't. I think it's sort of like a seller's market. I think labor is in the stronger position right now. You don't have to take all those, any job that just comes along. Because apparently there's a lot of people that want people to work, but they only want them to work for slave wages. And what are slave wages? Well, anything under a living wage. Let's just be clear. I know that it is disrespecting what an actual slave had to go through. I understand that. But just for economy of language, and then you know what I mean. Money that you cannot survive on. And every week that you work, you get further and further behind. And then you have to scramble for some government monies, if they're available, just to survive. Oh, but you're working. Maybe that model has to stop. If you can't afford labor, then you're a mom and pop business by definition. Mom and pop run the business and run the labor. When you can afford to pay a living wage, then you can hire. None of this, I just got this guy to agree to work for $1 an hour. Yes, a contract is a contract. No, there's a social contract involved, and this is the United States of America. All right? And our social contract sometimes goes beyond just the handshake. A lot of times, people have to be told. Yes, indeed, told. Okay, enough of that. We do have a curated show for you today, and it might even be considered a busy day. Because of the weekend, of course. At the top here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, that was, I believe, an Arizona lawmaker. All of a sudden, I forget. But a GOP lawmaker ripped his colleague's denial of the insurrection as bogus. And he is right. It is bogus. 101 House Republicans voted against protections for pregnant workers because they're the pro-life party. And an Arizona lawmaker threatened to sue his constituents for mentioning that he was at the Capitol insurrection. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a Deutsche Welle journalist was sentenced in Belarus to 20 days for covering the trial of 6 people charged with mass unrest. And far-right Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz expects to be charged, but eventually cleared in a perjury case that could doom his coalition government. The horror. The horror. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link. The chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, so go ahead, chat. If you would then look across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, right there is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your generosity once a month helps us pay our bills and fly under the radar and continue what we've been doing here at Netroots Radio for the last 10 years. Yes, we are the little powerhouse that could, and we still are. And we've been able to do it because of your generosity. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink and send those funds to us once a month, we're able to pay our bills. We are able to fly under the radar, continue this resistance broadcasting as the founders originally intended, and therefore fulfilling our civic duty. And thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. I take care of me, and I am at Justice Putnam on Twitter. And go ahead, follow me there, because I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that linked up on social media. And Twitter is part of that social media, so check it out. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Well, I got a bit of sad news last night late. Our good friend Angie Coiro, who does the In Deep show. Well, after 15 years of doing In Deep, she's calling it quits. And that's on top of her time of just being on KALW, the NPR station in the San Francisco Bay Area, for a considerable time before she started doing In Deep. And I had a neighbor and friend, Gordon Whiting, who was her executive producer. And I wouldn't say called it quits, but he moved into a more senior position and let young'uns do the work. And that's how we are. None of us are getting young anymore. So when Gordon had hung up the shield, so to speak, I thought maybe it might be. Now, we've had Angie on Netroots Radio for well over 5 years now. And I used to listen to her on KALW daily. Well, not daily, but whenever I had KALW on all the time. Let's just put it that way. So I have always respected her work, and she really does have a fantastic interview style, and she really got a lot of great interviews. So we'll be running some best ofs for the foreseeable future, and hey, everybody needs a rest. 15 years of doing that one particular show, that's a pretty good, darn long run. So congratulations, Angie. We're still going to miss you. All right. Well, let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. It comes out of the American Independent, but it is by the Associated Press, coming through the American Independent. A corner of West Virginia is wrenched by opioid addiction, is getting the chance to argue in a courtroom that some of the corporate giants it blames for the public health crisis that left hundreds of people dead deserve to be held accountable. The city of Huntington and surrounding Cabell County sued the nation's 3 largest opioid distributors. No matter the outcome of the federal court trial that opened this month, the verdict is expected to resonate well beyond the industrial region. The trial in West Virginia, as well as legal proceedings underway in California, could set the stage for resolutions to similar lawsuits brought by thousands of local governments across the U.S. Opioid overdoses have been linked to the deaths of nearly 500,000 Americans since 2000 and reached a record of nearly 50,000 in 2019 alone. Yet, the sprawling nature of litigation over the addiction epidemic around the country means it could take years to wrap up, years to get money to communities to expand treatment, and to make up for some of the economic losses caused by the crisis. The trajectory of the lawsuits is unlikely to mirror the lawsuits that states brought against the tobacco industry during the 90s. The landmark litigation over what cigarette companies knew about the health risks of smoking resulted in a few sweeping settlements that distributed money to nearly every state, while the opioid crisis involved a variety of plaintiffs suing companies up and down the pharmaceutical chain in state and federal courts. Instead, the lawsuits arising from the use of powerful prescription painkillers could evolve more like the litigation over the cancer risk linked to asbestos, which also involved many corporate players and ended up stretching on for decades. University of Georgia law professor Elizabeth Birch expects many companies named in the various lawsuits will have to pay up eventually, regardless of the results of individual trials. But rulings for the plaintiffs could speed things up. A win really helps the plaintiffs and creates momentum, Birch said. State attorneys general, local governments, and other entities have filed thousands of lawsuits over the last 5 years aimed at making segments of the drug industry pay for the lives lost or derailed by addiction. Before April, only one opioid case brought by a government had reached trial. In 2019, an Oklahoma judge ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay the state $465 million, and the company is appealing. Something just occurred to me when I mentioned about Angie Coiro and doing best of shows for the foreseeable future, and it could be for quite a while, is that we actually do have about a half a dozen new shows in the hopper coming our way. So we will be doing new shows, and then in, I don't know, a while, we'll start doing the best of for Angie Coiro. We'll miss her. This next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays is also out of the American Independent, but this time by one of their staffers, Emily Singer. 101 House Republicans voted against the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, a bill that seeks to prevent pregnant people from being discriminated against in the workplace. Even though nearly half of the GOP conference voted against it, the bill still passed 315 to 101, with votes of support from every Democratic member of the House. My bill, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, would deliver fairness and dignity to so many workers across America, House Judiciary Chair Jerry Nadler, who sponsored the bill, said ahead of the bill's passage on Friday. By providing reasonable accommodations, a glass of water, a stool, an extended break, it'll make a vast difference for pregnant workers. The legislation bans employers from refusing to make reasonable accommodations for pregnant workers, denying opportunities to pregnant workers based on their pregnancies or childbirth, forcing workers to take leave if reasonable accommodations can be made for pregnant workers to stay on the job, and taking adverse action against a pregnant worker who requests reasonable accommodations for their pregnancy or childbirth. Current law does not require employers to make reasonable accommodations to pregnant workers. The 101 no votes from Republicans, which amounts to nearly half of the 212 members of the GOP conference, came even though these same Republicans claim to be pro-life. In April, 211 of the 212 GOP lawmakers in Congress tried to force a vote on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. Jesus. A bill that seeks to, quote, prohibit a healthcare practitioner from failing to exercise the proper degree of care in the case of a child who survives an abortion or attempted abortion. Doctors say the bill is unnecessary and seeks to fix a problem that doesn't exist. It also is already a crime to deny medical care for a newborn baby. Pregnancy discrimination still remains an issue in the U.S., though. In October of 2020, pregnant women at an Amazon facility in Oklahoma spoke out to Vice News, saying the company did not approve of changes in assignment for pregnant warehouse workers at risk of miscarriage. And in September of 2019, UPS settled a pregnancy discrimination case in which workers had not been allowed to take lighter duty assignments for pregnant women. The great Oliver Willis of the American Independent brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Arizona Republican State Representative Mark Finchem, currently the only declared candidate for the position of Arizona Secretary of State, has threatened to sue a group calling for his recall. Lawyers for Finchem sent a letter dated May 5th to Rural Arizonans for Accountability, a group of Arizona residents working to file a petition to recall him, demanding they immediately cease and desist from publishing and retract all false and defamatory allegations contained in materials that you have published in support of your campaign to recall Representative Finchem. The letter refers specifically to the group's contention that Finchem played a role in the January 6 attacks on our nation's capital and that he has ties to domestic terrorist organizations. Finchem was in Washington, D.C. on January 6 and attended the Stop the Steal protest against certifying Trump's loss in the 2020 presidential election. Finchem tweeted from the protest that it was what happens when people feel they have been ignored, and complained that Congress refuses to acknowledge rampant fraud. Texts released by Finchem in February show him coordinating his arrival at the January 6 event with right-wing activist Ali Alexander, who helped organize the rally. Finchem also promoted the rally with tweets using Trump's language about a wild protest. Finchem wrote that he would be in Washington to fight for Trump. Defending his actions, Finchem released a statement on January 12th noting that he flew to D.C. to give Mike Pence key evidence of fraud in the Arizona presidential election that he hoped would lead to postponement of awarding of electors to Joe Biden. In other words, he's an insurgent. On his website, Finchem falsely claimed that in the 2020 election, Americans witnessed real-time reallocation of votes from one candidate to another broadcast on national television. You know what really happened? When votes come in, they count them. During the election, Finchem attempted to have the Arizona legislature appoint its own electors to replace those chosen by the voters who selected Biden for president. And campaign finance filings then show that the Trump campaign paid Finchem $6,000 for the effort. Finchem is a supporter of the conspiracy theory-fueled third audit of Arizona's election results aimed at undermining the official results showing President Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in the state. Well, that brings us to our break. And why don't we do so? And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You're listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Retro Spy. Originally entitled Ironbark for the codename of the real-life Russian protagonist in the story, the movie The Courier is a quiet but engaging spy thriller in the British tradition. It is, in fact, based on true events that form part of the backstory to the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's not a complicated tale. Affable British businessman Greville Wynne is recruited by MI6 as a courier because of his ongoing successful sales efforts in the then-communist Eastern Europe. Upon the natural-looking expansion of his operation to the Soviet Union, he makes contact with Oleg Penkovsky, a connected and senior bureaucrat whose portfolio includes not only trade, but also access to military information. Negatively impressed with Nikita Khrushchev and the irresponsibility of his plans to place missiles in Cuba, he agrees to supply information he believes will ratchet down tensions. The movie is mostly the story of the relationship between Penkovsky, played by veteran Mirab Nineeds, and that of Wynne, brought off by Benedict Cumberbatch, as the stakes ever so slowly increase. That's actually a good part of what makes this one work. In the first act, there's almost a light feel to the proceedings, as Wynn can't believe he's lunching with spies. Later, though, we see the craft before the final act where the consequences of Penkovsky's idealism and Wynn's loyalty hit home. In one pivotal scene before the really heavy chapters begin, the two are seen in facial close-up watching a performance of Swan Lake. Their expressions alongside the performance presage the rest of the story, which is why directors choose players this good. The Courier is a smart spy flick with no explosions or gunfire and an effective period piece. It's a must-see for fans of the genre. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. No one has ever seen a Tyrannosaurus walk. Still, movies like Jurassic Park have guessed how fast it would have done that. Now scientists have used the skeleton of a T-Rex to model the biomechanics of the animal's stride, and they've estimated it strutted at a leisurely pace, on par with humans, ostriches, elephants, and giraffes.
And it's not just limited to those animals, horses, gazelles, gnus. Turns out that actually most animals don't tend to walk super fast.
Pasha van Bijlert is a movement scientist at Vrije University in Amsterdam. His team studied the skeleton of a T-Rex housed in a Dutch museum. The specimen, nicknamed Trix, is exceptionally well preserved, so they were able to see how ligaments would have attached to and linked the animal's tailbones. Those ligaments, they would have acted like rubber bands, and the researchers used mathematical modeling to study how they would have given the tail bounce as the T-Rex walked. The animal could have taken advantage of that natural bouncy rhythm to save energy as it moved.
That is basically resonance. You get more movement for less effort if you choose the correct rhythm at which you do things.
So that helped them estimate the beat at which T-Rex would have pounded its feet. But to determine speed, they still needed to know how far each step was.
And to do that, we found a fossilized trackway of a slightly smaller tyrannosaurid, scaled it up to the size of our T-Rex, and that gives you a step length.
Multiply step length by step rhythm, and you get a speed of 1.28 meters per second, or about 2.9 miles per hour. The results were published by the Royal Society. Van Bijlert says he's seen a lot of headlines stating that humans could have outpaced T-Rex. Not so, he says, once the animal started running.
I guess we should be glad that there's a lot of time between us and T-Rex.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Not only are the rich different from you and me, they're getting more different than ever. I'm not referring to mere millionaires, but to the billionaire bunch. In the past year, while ordinary Americans have lost jobs, businesses, and homes due to the pandemic economic crash, America's 664 billionaires have found themselves nearly 40% richer than before COVID. These fortunate few collectively added more than $1 trillion in 2020 to their personal stashes of wealth. And practically all of them got so much richer by doing nothing. Their money made the extra money for them because corporate stock prices zoomed even as regular people lost income. Take a peek at the richest of these different ones, Jeff Bezos, the alpha geek of Amazon. He hauled in an additional $75 billion last year, roughly $37 million an hour. You could do a lot of good with such riches, or you could splurge on yourself. Jeff splurged. He bought one of the largest sailing vessels ever built. More than 1 1/3 football fields long, the super yacht cost the diminutive mega-billionaire some $500 million. Plus, he'll pay some $60 million each year for operating expenses. Also, he had to buy a support yacht to sail along with his main boat. Why? Because the 3 sails on his 400-footer are so huge that a helicopter can't land on the deck, requiring an auxiliary yacht to provide a helipad. See, the rich really are different. Where to park our helicopter while at sea is a problem you and I don't have to face. This is Jim Hightower saying, according to mega yacht sellers, the main draw of these ostentatious purchases is that they reinforce inequality, literally letting the rich float in leisure and luxury oceans apart from even having to see hoi polloi like us. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by our new Lowdown Happy Hour, now live streaming on Facebook from the Chat and Chew Cafe, with kick-ass political spark plugs like Beto O'Rourke, musical champions like Marcia Ball, and grassroots change makers like the New Georgia Project and People's Action. The Lowdown Happy Hour is reaching out to you to help put the move in movement. So grab a libation and join the fun. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.
Just when you thought that legislators in battleground states who have been working furiously to make voting far more difficult couldn't figure out any more voter suppression laws, they have. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The United States, particularly in the South, has a long history of partisan poll watchers descending on voters in communities of color on Election Day to intimidate voters into not voting, and if they do vote, to make sure that their votes are not counted. These Jim Crow-era poll watcher voter intimidation tactics are now being enshrined in law books across the South, once again. These laws will make it nearly impossible to remove from a polling place an extremely partisan poll watcher or poll watchers who are engaging in intimidating tactics against voters. And in a 21st century update, poll watchers will now be able to video record voters receiving assistance and post those videos on social media, which of course can dissuade a would-be voter from casting a ballot. There's more. These partisan poll watchers also will be authorized to overcrowd polling places, and they will have the legal right to get right up in the face of an election worker. During the campaign, Trump called for, quote, an army of poll workers. Merriam-Webster's first definition of army is a large organized body of armed personnel trained for war, especially on land. An army of poll watchers beginning in 2022? Seriously? Seriously. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1980. That was the day 4,000 strikers and their supporters gathered for the March for Dignity and Respect in Laurel, Mississippi. Over 200 mostly black women members of the International Chemical Workers Union Local 882 had been on strike against Sanderson Farms chicken processing plant for 15 months. Trade unionists from as far away as Cincinnati, Memphis, and North Carolina came to march in support. Sanderson Farms had cleared $58 million in profit, but paid workers just $3 an hour. The women demanded a contract that included more control over assembly line speed, overtime pay, and insurance. They complained of desperately low wages, inhumane working conditions, and even the inability to use the bathroom when necessary. Workers were given only gloves and an apron once a month, and a file to sharpen their often dull and rusty scissors and knives. They often referred to the processing plant as the plantation, where sexual harassment was rampant. Women workers often found themselves given dangerous assignments or even fired if they didn't put up with sexual advances of their foreman. Workers maintained that strikebreakers from the community were desperately poor and threatened with violence if they quit by local Ku Klux Klansmen who worked as supervisors at the plant. Some were known to have been involved in the murder and or intimidation of civil rights workers in decades past. The plant had been organized in 1972, but was extraordinarily weak. Nonetheless, women strikers understood that the union still served as an invaluable resource in the midst of a largely unorganized South. By the following February, the NLRB ruled that Sanderson had to resume contract negotiations and allow strikers to return to their jobs. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 51 degrees Fahrenheit. Expecting to be a bit cooler than yesterday. We were above 90 yesterday, expecting only highs of around 80. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is around here. And it will be sunny to partly cloudy, and winds will be out of the west-northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour, so a little stiff. Partly cloudy skies overnight, lows in the low 50s. Winds will remain out of the west-northwest at 10 to 15 miles per hour. Considerable clouds tomorrow early, with some decrease in clouds later in the day, with highs only around 70. What? And winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus here in what is supposed to be maskless Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon. We're still spiking. And this is not even the updated totals from the weekend. This is only from the end of Friday. We'll get the updated weekend totals later on today or tomorrow sometime, maybe even after showtime. But regardless, up until the end of Friday, our confirmed cases now stand at 10,901, a considerable spike. And we've also increased the deceased by several, which now stands at 139. I'd say keep wearing a mask, but that's just me. Grass pollen is very high, and that hurts sometimes. I got to tell you, right here outside the window in Rogue River, the air quality index for the region is good at 29 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is very high at 8. Take all the needed precautions for that. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.02 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 76%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that, of course, is known as the Weather Underground. London is 56 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 58 with a rain shower. Rome is 70 degrees and sunny. Oh, Rome. Kyiv is 64 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 65 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 81 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 73 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 53 and fair. San Francisco, California is 48 degrees and cloudy with a fog advisory. And New York, New York is 70 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. This first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays is by anonymous staff from the Associated Press. German international broadcaster Deutsche Welle says one of its freelance correspondents has been sentenced to 20 days in jail in Belarus. DW has said in a statement that Alexander Burakov was sentenced on Saturday for taking part in an unauthorized event. It said Burakov was arrested on Wednesday while waiting with other journalists for access to the trial of 6 people charged with mass arrest. He was waiting outside the courtroom door, and apparently that's called an unauthorized event. Indeed. Belarus has launched widespread detentions and trials in connection with the wave of protests that arose last year against authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko, who took office for a 6th term after an August election that opposition figures said was rigged. Classifying the group of journalists waiting outside the courthouse on May 12th as a banned gathering, is another step by Lukashenko's regime to suppress critical media reports, the DW said in a statement. Burakov said that he was repeatedly awakened at night and forced to strip naked while in pretrial detention, according to Deutsche Welle.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz expects to be charged, but eventually cleared in an investigation into whether he gave false testimony to a parliamentary commission. He told Sunday newspapers, ruling out the idea of resigning if indicted. The investigation by anti-corruption prosecutors made public last week poses a stiff political challenge for the conservative Kurz, age 34, who governs in coalition with the Greens. Kurz has painted himself as a victim of opposition parties trying to trap him into saying something that could be construed as perjury before the commission, which is looking into possible corruption under his previous coalition with the far-right Freedom Party, which collapsed in 2019. After every word of mine on 58 pages of testimony is put on the scale, I certainly expect a criminal complaint. That's right, he told the Kron newspaper in an interview, adding that he had not yet been questioned by prosecutors. But he said he was confident he would be exonerated in the case, which centers on whether he answered truthfully when asked about appointments to state holding company OBAG. I've spoken to numerous lawyers and several university professors. The tenor was always the same. No one can imagine that there will be a conviction here, he told the paper. In a separate interview with the Österreich paper, he rejected the idea of stepping down if indicted. I definitely rule that out. Like many people, I've made many mistakes, both privately and professionally. But what I definitely know is that I went into the commission with the intention of answering the questions truthfully. An opinion poll published by Österreich's showed Kurz's conservatives winning 35% support should parliamentary elections be held now, down 1 point from a week earlier, and 2.5 points from its showing in the 2019 elections. The commission has looked into the appointment in 2019 of a conservative loyalist as chief executive of OBAG, which manages Austria's stakes in companies including oil firm OMV. The investigation is looking into whether Kurz discussed the appointment with the candidate beforehand and whether the chancellor was involved in selecting members of OBAG's supervisory board, both of which Kurz denied at the commission. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre, Je veux changer d'atmosphère dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. Tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre. On ne peut plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon